Hello again, and welcome to a financial thought leadership podcast, Banking on Experience, sponsored by CRMNEXT, the banking CRM, where we simplify work, drive growth, and deliver on experience. This podcast is meant to empower individuals working in the financial industry with stories, experiences, and knowledge straight from the source. Please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and stay tuned for an awesome show. Everybody, welcome to another episode of Banking on Experience, and we're actually doing a takeover. Also, welcome to another episode of
the Strategic Hotbox. So if it was really weird for all of our listeners here to have a different voice pop on at just then, it's your girl, Dr. Brandi Stankovic, and I am here with my good friend, James Gilbert, and we are going to have a great conversation today about mental health and being better leaders. James, thank you for having me on your show. Welcome to the Strategic Hotbox. How cool is this?
Yeah, this is pretty awesome. I've never actually done the takeover thing, so this is pretty interesting. I want to introduce Brandi to our listeners on the Banking on Experience show really quick. Brandi is the COO and the Chief Strategy Officer of CU Solutions Group. She's also the host of the Strategic Hotbox, hence why we're on it. She's the co-author of the Strategic MVP. She's got a bachelor in finance and an MBA in education, and she's a mom of, her words, not mine, 2 beefcakes.
Yes, beautiful, delicious beefcakes. And you're also listening to James Gilbert. And for all of your listeners, they've gotten to know you. But anybody that might be new here today, James is the head of marketing for CRMNEXT. And he's got a background and a bachelor's in professional sales and engineering. So it's pretty broad spectrum. You've been doing marketing for 18 years, and then financial services more specifically for the last 6. I absolutely, one of my favorite things learning about you, though, is this journey you've recently been on in writing a chapter in a book. So congratulations on that, leading through the pandemic. And so anybody listening can go check that out. And you're a dad of 4. I don't know how you're doing it all.
Yeah, well, I mean, come on now, like it's nothing compared to what moms do. So I have a lovely wife, and that's who makes it happen. Let's be real. So I rely on her way too much, and she is amazing. So let's get into today. We're going to be talking about mental health, why we should focus on it as especially leaders. So we're going to hit on that. Let's dive right into the topic. Mm-hmm. You had a question for me. I want to answer that. Let's do that first, and then we'll dive into why you're passionate about mental health.
One of the important pieces to me is understanding your leadership journey. So you start in thinking you want to be an engineer, and you end up having a conversation with me in financial services about mental health. How do we get from point A to point B?
I started my career in sales in the very, very, very beginning, way back. I was doing sales, but I had already got my engineering degree. So I was doing sales while I was putting myself through school. It came to a point where I became fairly okay at marketing as well. So then I started assuming some marketing positions. There was a point in time where I realized that I wanted to have a better understanding of sales as a business, right? Mm-hmm. So it just so happens that there was a local university. I had already been a director at this point. So I had already like 12 plus years of experience, somewhere close to there. And I was like, I'm going to go back and get another bachelor's degree, and I'm going to do it in professional sales. It was the best decision I ever made. This degree was the most applicable and tangible and just realistic things that are happening in the business world. What it taught me also is because I had an engineering degree, I had a really strong data background, which made me a stronger marketer. Mm-hmm. Made me understand how to measure sales better. So there was moments where it kind of brought me under the fold of leadership, even before I was technically even ready for it. Leaders were bringing me into conversations to help articulate the story around the data. And that's how I grew into a leadership role, probably faster than I should have. But nonetheless, we're here, and I'm enjoying every minute of it. So now I've had a chance this is my second stint as a CMO, and it has been incredible. Hosting the podcast is just icing on the cake. I get to meet incredible people like you and others within the financial services space, and it's been amazing.
That's awesome. And I love your vulnerability and talking a little bit about the growth that comes in it and being pushed or promoted when it's uncomfortable. And all of those different pieces can impact a leader's mental health, just like, in the conversations that we're having today, whether it's being outside of our comfort zone or being too much in our comfort zone, starting a new career, starting a new industry, all of those things play a role.
It's not talked about enough. We oftentimes will promote people to a leadership role, and we expect them to immediately have the interpersonal skills of managing people, but they've never been trained to do that. So we think of individual performance as an opportunity to promote people, but then we don't think of like their interpersonal skills with managing people, which is a totally different skill set. So I think when we promote people, we also have to, as leaders, realize there's a conversation that you need to have with these people and help them understand that it's okay to still be promoted as an individual contributor. If you don't have the skill set, or if you don't want to have the skill set to manage people, like there's just some people that don't like it, right? Or they're not good at it. That's okay too. It doesn't mean that you can't climb the ladder the same. And I think as organizations, we have to create that type of autonomy to where we're allowing that type of freedom and also those type of conversations.
I think you're right. There's a lot of different pieces to being promoted, to organizations supporting that, and not just allowing it to occur, but encouraging it to occur, and the cultural nuances that are involved, like with the interpersonal dynamics that happen throughout that process. But I think it leads into our conversation today. And certainly we've been through one hell of a 18 to 24 months here now. And sometimes I feel like we're through it. I've given up on thinking that it's going to happen any day. It's bringing at this whole new added pressure for mental health in general.
Oh, I absolutely think it does. We got to this topic because it's something that you're very passionate about. I'd love for you to explain, why are you passionate about mental health outside of the norm, right? Like, I think everybody wants to focus on it, but they don't quite know how. Why are you particularly passionate about it?
Well, it's because of the humans, right? We are all human, and mental health is a huge component of who we are as humans. It's so private that it's happening on the inside of individuals, and it's also not something that people readily talk about. And when they do, there's such a stigma involved in that we are embarrassed or are afraid to be vulnerable, to say that I'm struggling or say that we're struggling. And this last bit has created an added element of isolation too. So individuals are in their homes, in their spaces, in quarantines, and potentially not able to share, even if they wanted to get some of that information or get those thoughts and feelings out. It's also increasingly becoming something around the next generation too, younger and younger. We hear about it more and more in mainstream about young individuals taking their lives or struggling, and it just, in a lot of ways, the more that we can be here for each other, the more that we can practice kindness, the better. And so I feel very strongly about it because it is a silent killer. It can impact our physical well-being, and it can impact our own ability to achieve our dreams.
Mic drop. I mean, we could be done right there. Like, that was a great one. I'm going to be bold here. I'm going to say a word that I typically don't like to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. I hate, okay, I'm using the word on purpose, the stigma that we cannot be vulnerable in an organization and in a business. We literally have created a fear, just like you said, not just at the leadership level, but at every level, where people cannot feel like they can express how they're feeling without ramification or something that's going to impact the way that they're viewed or impact future roles. We have created that. And now we have to knock it down. One of the things that I try to do with my team is when we have one-on-ones, we try to not focus on anything related to the work that's at CRMNEXT. Like, we can have a separate one-on-one, but the cadence that we want to create is all about like, hey, like, how are you doing as a person? How's family life going? What's going on in your personal life? How can I help you? And we come up with 4 goals, 2 that are personal and 2 that are career related And that's what we talk about in our one-on-ones.
Mm-hmm.
It breaks it down, and 9 times out of 10, we never even get to the career goals. We just talk about the personal goals, and I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah.
I think we have to be willing to bring that more personal side in, because remember, during the pandemic, the bridge and the gray line of work-life balance got destroyed entirely.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the case, now we have to understand people as humans more and more, and their personal side. So that's my 2 cents.
Absolutely true.
What do you think the biggest challenges, Brandi, that people have in just trying to tackle mental health and addressing it? 1, as leaders, and then 2, as people that are leading people under them?
I would say you hit on a big piece of it, the vulnerability, the stigma, the fact that it's internal and not as readily obvious to people around. I also think there's some institutional challenges that are associated with mental health, in that it's not as covered from a medical benefit standpoint. Some plans, of course, will include, or several plans will include mental health, but only in a small way, not necessarily in the broader spectrum that you might have wellness in your regular annual checkups. Why wouldn't we have a regular annual mental wellness checkup? And people taking a personal day and doing some of that, being that American go get 'em culture is almost kind of like, we are rewarding one another for being over the top and being busy and being burnt out, versus rewarding one another for being healthy and including some of that mental health into our lives. And so we end up having not all organizations are like this, but several do end up having some fluffy wellness program where there's yoga downstairs, and it's always the 3 people, the same people that go to the yoga class, and not everybody is taking, a part in some of that. And so wellness programs, mental wellness programs, need to be bigger than just that one meditation person we had come to our annual meeting 4 years ago, and rewarded in looking at the people next to us and saying, you are doing great because you are taking care of yourself in that way. So there's institutional challenges, and then there's the other side, the intangibles as well.
I've actually never heard it put that way, and I really like that. And you're spot on, by the way. There's not a lot of benefits that organizations are giving for mental health. But that's kind of what the world needs. There's also a stigma around like this. Everything has to be logged for PTO, and we have to make sure, if they don't have PTO, then they can't take it. Our employees are not prisoners to this stuff. We have to realize, they're people, and I don't really care if they don't have any PTO left. If they need a mental health day to make sure that we're doing great work in a week from now, I'm going to give it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes we have to do that without worrying about, well, do they have the allocated PTO to do it?
I think that there's a lot of cultural things ingrained in that, right? So you say everybody is not planned, everybody's just going to get a random day off. That would stress me out so bad, because if I don't get to plan for it, then how does that impact my next week? How does that impact, my future going forward if things are kind of planned out? So that it's ingrained a cultural philosophy or personality in that way. I wouldn't want a random day off. I'd rather be able to take the day off when I want to. And so it's a balance in that. And that's just me personally as a human. Where I agree with you, why can't we be in a place where that would be something that everybody could love and explore? The other side of it, and talking about personalities of employees and those that use all their PTO and those that don't, there's forever going to be a chasm, some internal hierarchy of individuals that abuse benefits versus use benefits. And I think that as organizations, we just have to manage through that piece of it, and just tap back into the why we're offering it. If we're offering it for everyone's mental health, then don't charge them a PTO day at all. If we're offering it as, I only want to give a benefit to people that deserve the benefit, then that's pretty subjective and can have the opposite effect on mental health. And so I think that it's really just organizations asking themselves, go back to the why are we doing this, and then be generous in your why. And I think that things like a day off would be lovely for a lot.
I'm actually the same way. I wouldn't want just a random day without warning. I would actually want it planned. And you bring up a really good point here, and I want to double down on it. There are unique personalities that exist at every level at an organization. And as it relates to mental health, like just with that example, like there's differences in what people feel like is going to help them and won't help them.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the best way that an organization can tackle and try to solve mental health when it comes to the differences of opinions and things like that that exist throughout the organization?
Well, I think that if we start from an individual perspective first, if all of us out there did a bit of a personal assessment, conduct a self-check, and because a lot of times we don't realize how dark of a path we're in until we come back into the light and go, whoa, it was dark in there, right? And so whether that's a post-mortem type practice, that's typically when we notice that we weren't in the best mental health place. And so if we can do a self-check in the moment to recognize this is what it feels like in the moment, and asking ourselves, what are my priorities? Where do I need help? Where do I not ask for help? And who can help, around me? But also where am I most successful? And what brings me joy? And just asking yourself, doing an assessment, figuring out where you're at mentally and how it maybe is manifesting itself in physical things as well. But then from there, make a list, like make it as objective as you can, because mental health is inside. It ends up becoming something that can become bigger than you intended, or you can justify or not take action because it feels so monumentous. And if we make a list, we make it objective, it allows us to break it down. Like the enemy of execution is complexity. And from a mental health standpoint, it's nothing but complex, right? And so the more simple we can make it, putting things in a list that we know bring us joy, that we know provide clarity, then that can support. And then schedule it. If any of the high performing leaders that are watching today, they're good at it, is scheduling time and making shit happen, right? And I'd love to hear your side of it. From an organizational perspective, make it a priority, put it in writing, get it in your strategic plan. Challenge your benefits providers to offer better solutions, challenge your human resources department to create wellness plans that incorporate whole body wellness, and examine everything from ergonomics to time off to, decluttering, to all of those different pieces that can play a role. But get it in writing, get it in the plan, have the whole organization involved.
I love what you just said. And this was something that I learned as I grew into a leadership role. One of the things that I didn't get a warning on, okay? Mm-hmm. No one told me how lonely it can be being a leader. It is hella lonely.
Did you just use the word hella?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that took me back to like 1995.
Yeah, it is though. I mean, we'll create an action item list and some takeaways, but I think one of the things that we should add to that, right, is take an hour sometime this weekend, have no distractions, and think about just how you're feeling as a leader. We're always putting out fires. We're always trying to make the best decision for the company. And when you're growing into a leadership role, you create friendships and relationships that are internal in the organization that you can rely on, you can bounce ideas off of. You might be able to vent, right? Mm-hmm. As a leader, you don't have that. You have communities and networking and people that you get to know that are outside the organization that help with that. And maybe your spouse or your partner, but it's oftentimes a very lonely road, especially for like CEOs as well, right? I know that's a big thing that I know a VC company called High Alpha, they focus on that with CEOs and co-founders to need that. And I think that there's more of a need for leadership also to, one, recognize that this could be a problem, and what you're feeling internally could be this, and we have to accept it, and then we have to be willing to try to address it. And you brought up all the points on how to try to address it, like schedule that time, document it, and make sure that it's clean, and then make it happen, because that's what we do. Right? We try to make things happen as leaders. It's another reason why there's that stigma around people feeling like they can't talk about it. Because if I'm a leader and I'm talking about, I have issues with with this with my mental health, or I'm struggling with feeling alone, or whatever the case may be, right? Then the rest of my leadership team, is my CEO, are they going to think I'm not capable of doing my job? That's always the frame of mind that happens, right? And is there risk in me disclosing this and talking about it openly with anybody within the organization? And if there is any risk, if we have any thought in our mind that, oh, there's risk, we're not going to talk about it. That's how we work. And I think we have to allow things to be talked about, and those things not to be held against anyone, and help people through it. I think that's the key. To your point, all of us being human with each other and showing more kindness.
So building on what you're just saying, organizations can do that with tangible workspaces, but each of us can do that in our minds and in our action, in our homes. And I challenge everybody listening to think of that place in their life that is very cluttered, physically cluttered, like there's physical things cluttered. And typically that's a reflection of that area of your life can be a little mentally or emotionally cluttered, or you're feeling insecure. And so thus we gather clutter there. And so it may or may not be true for everybody, but I challenge all of us to think through that and declutter. One thing that I've learned over the last 2 months is I can't handle it all. As much as I think I can, most of the time, I just can't. And so it forced that, in a sense, just like the pandemic forced us all working virtual that nobody thought we could do, right? It has forced me to simplify my life because my brain literally can't handle all of those different things at the same time. And so thus, the more that we can do that intentionally, fixing the roof before it rains, right? The better we will be, the more thoughtful we will be in that process. So crossing things off the list that you just don't care about enough to get done, or getting it done, hire somebody else to get it done, outsource, delegate to your team, whatever we have to do to move things that have been sticking and weigh us down. The final piece I want to mention is the concept of sweet spots and soft spots, or hot spots even. The sweet spots would be places in our life that bring us joy, that bring us happiness, and identifying that, putting a thumb on it. And then the hot spots being those triggers, those things that cause us to go into our darkness, whatever our darkness looks like. What we want to get away from is going there, so we don't use the coping mechanisms to get out of there. Alcohol, overcompensating, whatever. But sometimes we can't avoid the hot spots. Let's be real. Like we can all say theoretically, because we're sitting on a webinar, or in a podcast, and we can avoid it forever. It's just not the case, right? But when we recognize where those places are, prepare for it. If it's going to be freezing cold when you leave the house, you grab a jacket, or at least you're pissed you didn't grab a jacket if you walk outside and you're freezing, right? The same is true of that. If you know what those hot spots are that cause you to go down the rabbit hole of darkness, then prepare for them. Go into them, with some strategies. Go into them with some healthy coping mechanisms. Go into them knowing that, and that can help us through too.
I also have a suggestion. We do this on my team. We call them employee user manuals. When you go and buy a product at a store, there's a user manual. It tells you how to operate it. It tells you what things not to do, warnings, things like that. This was an idea that somebody on my team actually came up with, and we implemented it, and it's been a huge success. Whenever we have a new hire, we have them fill out a user manual. So they tell us how they like to be communicated with. Do they like to be communicated via email? Do they want a phone call? Do they want a Teams chat? Like, how do they like to be communicated? And then what are their triggers? What are some things that we should avoid? Some people have triggers that are individual when we're talking one-on-one. Other people have higher triggers and more triggers when you're in a group setting where they don't want those things to be talked about and revealed, right? And it has been an eye-opening experience for all of us, because we all read those. So when a new hire comes on, they present it to our team and we talk through it. And it's fascinating to know also as a leader on how to manage through everyone's user manuals, because everyone's so unique. We've learned as a team that the best communication method amongst our team is actually through like a collaboration channel, like a Slack or a Teams. And that's because email gets lost. And that's primarily how a lot of people communicated before we did these user manuals. And there's also triggers on there specifically about like what caused you to go from 0 to 60 on your anger scale? What can make you get to that point? And it also helps us just understand how to communicate with each other in a group setting and individual settings and make sure we're not triggering. It works fantastically well. I think if you Google employee user manual, there's templates out there that exist, but it's amazing. I highly recommend doing it. It can be a very easy part of the onboarding process when you bring on new people. And it can also be very easily implemented across an organization that's not hiring new people, right? Like it's easy for somebody to create this document and just say, hey, this is how I work.
I love it. It's great. Great idea, great example, and a perfect thing for everybody to frame out and then at least spark conversation around who they are as a human.
Agreed. We're at time, Brandi.
Well, answer me this. The world would be a better place if
everyone treated each other as a human being and not as an avatar on digital assets.
Thank you. And if we were to put together a top 3 kick-ass strategies, so we're doing a little different, Hotbox listeners. It's been us back and forth, and this has actually been a lot of fun, James. So thank you very much for that. And if we had our top 3 kick-ass, it's usually my favorite time. It'll soon be your favorite time. The takeaways from today. The first one you mentioned, take an hour. I love the way you made it simple. Everybody that's listening, that's watching us today, take an hour. Schedule it, do it, doesn't matter what you do, therapy, beach, stare at the wall, whatever you want to do, take an hour. Number 2, I think we talked about over and over, is put it in writing. So if you're an organization, put it in writing your strategic plan. If you're an individual leader, put it in writing with on your goals, your own individual development goals, or scheduling that hour. And if you're a leader of other humans, the employee user manual is a perfect way to get things in writing. So getting it down, getting it writing. And then the last suggestion that I had, let's see what you think, James, is that to reach out to somebody, write a love note to somebody. Now, love is loose in this, it can be a colleague or a peer, but write a note, a message to somebody that brings you joy or support, and just say thank you. Just write a note. Just the act of writing the note will make a difference.
I love that. I mean, again, the world needs more kindness, and it's right now, I think many people feel it's few and far between. It's the simple acts that get us to the point where we're feeling like the world is hopeful, right? I think we all need that.
Absolutely. And so if I say a farewell to all the Hotbox listeners, you know where to find us. Hit us up on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, any of those places. We'll be there. Let us know other topics you want us to tackle here on the Hotbox. And hello to all my new friends on the Banking on Experience podcast and all the followers there as well. Thank you very much. And I hope I talk to you soon. James?
Thanks so much, Brandi, for being on the podcast. Dr. Brandi Stankovic, everybody. Seriously, it's been amazing. This has been fun, and hopefully there's some good takeaways for everybody.